I put out the call for questions and you delivered. Thank you to everybody who submitted a question in this Q&A thread that I put up in the YouTube community section. I'm going to take a stab at answering as many of these as I can, including a question about the next League Battle deck, not the Dragapult one, but one that's coming out in November of this year. Another question about meta decks and where the state of the meta is right now. Some questions about Pokemon TCG Pocket actually making those cards physical, and a whole bunch more. I'm Jet from inthirdperson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's dive into your questions. One ABCN5D asks, what do you think the next League Battle deck will be? Now, normally I usually do this as a standalone video, but I kind of need a feature topic to help sell this video. You probably clicked on this because you saw, what's the next League Battle deck? And yeah, we're gonna do that here, but also I think there's slim pickings for the November deck, and we'll get into it here. Let me switch over to my fancy presentation view. At the time of this recording, we don't even have the Dragapult League Battle deck out yet, but we actually have enough information to at least have the conversation of what's coming out next. And the next League Battle deck is probably going to come out around November 2025. League Battle decks in the fall/winter drop always come out at November to be there in time for Christmas. We also know that based on what we've seen of how Pokemon produces League Battle decks, it usually goes from like the time they lock in the list to when they actually are in stores takes about 8 months. So they're going to be locking in the deck list for the November League Battle deck really soon. And if I had to suspect when they're going to lock that League Battle deck list in, it's going to be around the launch of Journey Together. So I think any cards from Journey Together before are going to be eligible. But if you're looking at, say, Heatwave Arena and you want to see the Ethan deck or the Garchomp deck, which I think was going to be awesome, it's not going to be this upcoming League Battle deck. Those cards are coming out too late for this release, unfortunately. Most likely not. I would not hold my breath for a Garchomp League Battle deck in November, despite how awesome that deck looks. And the last big consideration here is that there will not be any G-Block cards in the upcoming November League Battle deck because G-Block cards rotate in the following spring. And there's some really big cards there that are staples right now in our format, such as Arven and Iono and more. Unfortunately, this also means Goldengo EX is not getting a League Battle deck. This is a archetype that started out really slow, but has gained in popularity and tournament success, and Goldengo is looking very strong for the upcoming tournament season. However, it has a G marker, and if the deck is coming out in November and rotating out in the following March, that's like 3 to 4 months worth of tournament legality, and Pokemon wants to give players as much time as they can with these League Battle decks. So Goldengo is not happening in a League Battle deck format, and probably not happening in any pre-constructed deck format because of how soon it's rotating. Another unfortunate deck that will not make it to a League Battle deck for the time being is Raging Bolt EX. Now, Raging Bolt itself does not rotate until 2027, but Sada's Vitality was released in 2026 with Paradox Rift, and that card rotates out in 2026. And Raging Bolt, while we've seen other ways of playing it with the Belly Bolt in Japan, it's getting a little bit of tournament success, you kind of still need Sada's Vitality to accelerate energy to Raging Bolt. And without Sada's Vitality, I think this deck completely falls off a cliff. And yes, it is technically possible for Sada's Vitality to get an updated tournament marking, but they usually don't update the tournament markings for trainers unless they're absolutely essential cards like a Professor's Research or a Boss's Orders or Energy Switch, something that Pokemon thinks is core to the overall health and balance of the game. And I don't necessarily think Sada's Vitality is on that level, even though there are a number of decks like a Raging Bolt, like an Ancient Box that are going to fall off a cliff because Sada's Vitality rotates out a year earlier than those archetypes. But because it's rotating out earlier, I can't see Pokemon making a League Battle deck for Raging Bolt either. If we take those out, the pickings are actually kind of slim, and I'm not necessarily enthused with these picks, but here's what I think are the most likely candidates for a League Battle deck in November. To me, the most likely pick is Archaludon EX. Right now, it's one of the strongest decks that you can play pre-rotation and post-rotation. I do love the fact that it's a pretty self-sufficient card in that it accelerates energy to itself, and the support cards, trainer cards, we're going to be losing a lot of core pieces like Arvin and Iono in the 2026 rotation, but Archaludon in and of itself at its core is still a very strong and self-sufficient Pokemon. So adapting Archaludon for the rotation the following year is probably going to be fine. I do love the fact that it's also one of the easier decks to play. That, I mean, not to say that ease of play is a requirement for League Battle decks. Like, we're getting Dragapult this year, and Dragapult is one of the hardest decks to play. But Archaludon being one of the easier competitive decks to play, I think is a nice touch. And another very minimal, not necessarily minimal, but one of the big considerations here is the production of these decks, and the League Battle decks use the same box and they just change the graphics on the front. So we've got the League Battle deck, and from year to year they're using the same box with the same window, and you can just change the graphics on this pretty easily and then just change the name here to Archaludon EX, and that's not that big of a deal, versus some of the others decks like the trainer decks, which are gonna require a little more elbow grease and possibly a change to this package, which makes it not feasible in the immediate term to put certain other trainers Pokemon decks in this exact box. But Archaludon should go in here fine. My second pick would actually be my first pick in terms of decks that I want in this format, but I do think there's a major caveat to Lily's Clefairy EX. Yes, this deck is absolutely tearing up Japan, more in the box style that has the Pikachu EX and the Wellspring Mask Ogerpon and the Blood Moon Ursaluna, that sort of box style deck. There's too many EXs to put inside a League Battle deck, but you could build a good foundational core with Lily's Clefairy and Teal Mask Ogerpon EX. And I think that would be awesome. I would buy that day one. But there is a challenge with the box. As I just showed you that Charizard box, and it has Charizard on the front, Pokemon have established that they want to repackage the trainers decks in a different way. So we saw what the rival battle decks look like with the Marnie on the front, and it's called Marnie and not called the Pokemon's name. And if it's Lily's Clefairy, is it called Lily? And then the rival battle box only has room for 3 EX Pokemon. Like, there's different considerations of, like, do we change the League Battle deck to a rival battle deck? Like, there are other sort of logistical questions and branding questions for a trainer's Pokemon deck that I don't know if Pokemon has the time to answer for this upcoming cycle, especially because when they make changes to the style of the box, they usually do that at the beginning of the year. This wouldn't be an end of year thing. And now I'm going like super inside baseball here, talking about the production of these products. I would expect that the next League Battle deck is going to be in a box like this versus a box like this, which is why I think Lily's Clefairy is kind of a notch down, but gameplay mechanic wise, I think it's a perfect fit. Alex Smith 5430 asks, how do you find your next deck after rotation? My whole Lost Zone deck rotates, so how do you find new decks and strategies? Like, first off, my condolences to you and to all of the Lost Zone players that are losing their decks, all of the people that are playing Regidrago, Palkia, any of these archetypes that are rotating. My condolences to you losing out on that deck. You can still play it in Expanded, of course, but I know that's not the same thing. As for how to find decks, I'm actually not the best person to ask for this. I get the sense that there are a number of people in the Pokemon TCG community that have their pet deck and maybe a counter deck or something, and that's all they play ever. And by virtue of the content that I make, I'm playing different decks all the time. I don't get to master any of these decks because I have to jump between deck to deck to deck in order to make the content that I make. So this isn't that big of a deal. Like, I'm not really finding a deck because I'm just jumping between decks all the time, and there's always something else I can play. And even when I play the physical TCG, I have a bunch of decks built in varying degrees. And like here, I just grabbed a couple off the shelf. Like, I've got a Charizard deck here. I also have just showing, like, I like having options and playing different things. That's my Gardevoir deck. And then this other one is it's Miraidon. So I just happen to have a bunch of decks. I like to play different decks and dabble and experiment, and I'm not really the type to commit, so there's always something else I could play in my queue. But if I were a committed player of a specific deck and I knew that deck was going away, I think before rotation, like you know well in advance that your deck is going away. At that point, you kind of want to try something else. And I think the best way to do that is with a digital application. Usually Pokemon TCG Live is the easiest way to play these games and use these cards digitally and play against other people. Get a feel for that play style and see if you like it or not. There are other Pokemon TCG card simulators out there. I think Twin Leaf is one, and there's a couple of others. I don't know the names off the top of my head, but if you want to play the Pokemon TCG digitally, there are ways of doing it. If Pokemon TCG Live is not your cup of thing, you could, or your cup of tea, cup of thing. Yeah, from there, you could also like print out proxies. Here's an archetype that maybe you find interesting and print out those cards and then sleeve them up and play it that way. Or watch content, watch a YouTube channel like mine or any of the other creators in this Pokemon TCG competitive space and watch other people play those decks and just get a sense of how they work and see if that's something that you want to play. Otherwise, I don't necessarily think there's a science to it. It's really just like explore the options out there and see what you would find interesting. Fable S30 asks, what are your thoughts on TCG getting Pokemon Pocket Set, kind of like how we got Pokemon Go? Would love to hear your take. This is an intriguing question. I love Pokemon TCG Pocket, obsessed. I play it all the time, and I think the cards are absolutely stunning, and I would love to see them in a physical form. And there's a number of people that want to see those as physical cards. You can buy them on like Etsy and stuff, unofficial ones, of course, and they're being sold out there because people just want those arts, even though there are certain aspects of them that you can't get in a physical form. Like those immersive rare cards are not, you can't have a video playing inside the card itself, but people still love just that still image because the art on those cards is so stunning. Pokemon have made it clear that they will use pre-existing arts and put them into Pocket. Of course, mechanically the cards are reworked and stuff, but I don't think if Pokemon were to use the art from Pokemon TCG Pocket in the paper TCG, I think they would have to rework the cards somewhat. You can't just have the exact same attacks in Pocket as in the regular TCG because the games are balanced way differently from one another. So it would have to be like a whole mechanical rework in order to make those cards work in the physical TCG in their current form. And I'm not sure Pokemon wants to put in the work to do it. Not to say that they're like lazy, but I could see Pokemon being like, we love the fact that this ecosystem of cards is different from that ecosystem of cards, and they'll never meet. I could see them doing that, like maybe they find some spaces and do like sort of a trainer gallery of like a handful of cards that are going to be in the TC or in Pocket that are reworked into proper Pokemon TCG cards. Maybe they do something like that. It would be kind of cool if they did it as a Pokemon Pocket Set. I would be concerned about like confusion between the two games. They definitely have to mechanically rework these cards in order to work in the proper TCG, but the desire is definitely there. If it's I would like to see the cards in paper form because I think those cards look amazing. Back-to-back Pocket questions here. Set Sail TCG Queen asks, what are your thoughts on Pokemon TCG Pocket becoming a physical TCG? This is actually kind of a funny question because Pokemon Pocket as a physical TCG kind of exists already. We have Pokemon My First Battle, which is a little different from Pocket, but there are a lot of similarities as well. This has two smaller decks. They are 17 cards apiece. The bench is only 3 wide, just like Pocket. You're taking prize points, and it's 3 prize points, kind of like Pocket. The biggest mechanical difference here is the way that energy works. This has energy cards that you put into a energy zone versus a zone that you get to pull 1 energy from. And I will say, as someone who's played Pocket and I've played like a whole run through on the channel and reviewed it, I like this game a lot, and I love the fact that in particular this version of it is designed for newcomers, especially kids, to get into the game with the smaller card decks and simplified cards. I think this thing is fantastic for young children to learn how to play the Pokemon TCG. Could you bring in the exact rules of Pocket into something like this? I think for the most part, yes, but there are certain aspects of the digital game where it's very intentionally digital. Like Pokeball finds a random card from the deck versus you search for a specific card. And yes, you could theoretically say like, have a card that searches for a random Pokemon, and then you take your deck and then you open it up and you pull out all the Pokemon and then you randomize those and then you pick one of those cards. Like you could theoretically do that, but it's not nearly as smooth translating it out to the paper TCG. So I have seen people do it. I've seen people like screenshots of people in tournaments that have built their own Pocket decks, and I think that's awesome. But there are other cards that just don't work as well by design. Like imagine Porygon Z, where it gets to randomly change your energy. Like then you need your opponent to carry a handful of every single type of energy that it could randomly switch to. I think that would be a logistical nightmare. And I think that it's actually amazing that Pocket does things that the physical TCG doesn't do or can't do or doesn't do that wouldn't be smooth to play in order to create some differentiation between the two games. But would I play a physical version of Pocket? Yes. Does it create confusion in the marketplace if they were to coexist as two separate games? Probably also yes. And because of that, I think that's going to be the biggest thing holding back TCG Pocket from being a serious thing, is that you kind of cannibalize sales between and players between the two games. And I don't think Pokemon wants to split it that much. Yes, this is technically a separate game, but it's like a one-off thing. There's only 2 different boxes, so there's 4 different decks. You can't upgrade these, and they just kind of exist there in their own little universe. And maybe they make a Pocket set that also exists in its own little universe. But I think with Pocket, because it's aimed at older players, you want to customize it with Pocket cards, and now you're managing 2 entire TCGs, and I'm not sure Pokemon wants to do that, especially at a time when they can barely keep the cards in stock for one of them. Munchlax Munchkin asks, what is your look on the state of the TCG right now meta-wise? You feel like the meta is healthy this moment? And also curious on what your favorite deck is to play all-time is/was. Now, I think the overall state of the game is... Technically, I think it is fine. It is a game with a pretty decent balance, and there's definitely lots of decks that are in the competitive mix, but personally, I'm not too interested in playing right now. You've probably seen over the last little while, I haven't done much in the way of gameplay videos on the channel, and there's multiple reasons for that. I think one, I'm just not interested in playing the game at this point in time. I feel like the last year of the Pokemon TCGs has been like, while it's good and it's competitive and reasonably balanced, it just hasn't shaken up all that much for my liking. There hasn't been that many new decks or meta swings, and some would argue that's a good thing that it's not a roller coaster of just decks flying in and out, but like it just feels like it hasn't changed all that much throughout the year. Last year was Regidrago kind of came up, Dusknoir made things annoying, but like the same archetypes were the same archetypes that didn't change all that much. And then things really slowed down for me in Surging Sparks and Prismatic Evolutions, where neither of those sets really changed all that much. Like Surging Sparks kind of added Archaludon, and then Prismatic Evolutions was really just Badoo. And otherwise, it just feels like the same game. And I'm also like someone who is maybe more prone to getting burned out because I'm someone who makes content for the Pokemon TCG. I'm playing this game every day. I'm jumping between deck to deck every set to see what the new differences are, and there just hasn't been a lot. And on top of that, we're also near rotation, so any sort of like me playing the game, people are just going to be like, oh, I don't care about these videos because these decks are going to be obsolete in a couple of weeks. So I have not been playing all that much, not necessarily because the game is in a bad state, but just my personal interest in where the current meta is at, on top of the fact that rotation's coming soon and people are already starting to look ahead to what's happening. And for me as a content creator, the covering post-rotation stuff has been a lot more interesting for me as a creator, but also more fruitful in terms of people wanting to watch that content and engage with that content. So this time every year, I mean, starting last year, this year, and probably next year and beyond, this sort of Q1 is going to be the time where I kind of pull back from the game and focus on post-rotation content. But generally speaking, I think the meta's fine. It's just not particularly interesting for me right now. Post-rotation, though, I will probably be all back in. I love this time of the year when rotation happens and old cards disappear, old decks disappear, and new decks arrive, and new strategies have to be formed with those old decks. So really excited to hop back on the bandwagon when that time comes. As for my all-time favorite deck, man, there's a number of decks that I've really enjoyed, but the number one pick for me, I think quite possibly always, is Mew VMAX. I think that deck was so much fun to play, and Mew was just such a cool attacker, being able to copy attacks off the bench, kind of like what Zoroark is going to be able to do, but Mew had better attacks to copy, and on top of that, just had the most insane set of support cards, whether it was Genesect drawing cards, Meloette as a single prize attacker, being able to accelerate a bunch of energy with Alessa Sparkle and Fusion Strike energy, power tablets. That deck was so busted and so fun to play. And it's not necessarily like I'm a big fan of just like really strong decks. Lugia is arguably the single most broken deck of all time, and I hate playing that deck. And it's because just I don't like the process of trying to get those Archeops in the discard pile before the end of turn 2, or else you're pretty much cooked. And I never liked that style of play. But Mew VMAX was an absolute joy. And even if it wasn't as strong as it was, I think that would probably still be up there as one of, if not my all-time favorite deck. But because it's incredibly strong, it's my GOAT. And quite possibly, I mean, I don't want to say it'll always be my GOAT, but right now, at the time of this recording, it is my GOAT. John Manoza GZ2WH asks 2 questions. I'm not going to answer the question about buying cards from outside the United States. I am not overly familiar with buying Pokemon cards outside of my country, and I'm not based in the United States either, so I'm not the person to ask that type of question. But I will answer the first one. Question: are Pokemon cards nowadays getting power creep, since mostly are just updated to look better, but old cards rarely happen to be in TCG? And I wonder, I don't want to make assumptions about how much you play the TCG, if at all, but there are a couple of things that are at play here, because cards aren't just updated to look better, right? The Charizard EX, lowercase EX, is different from the old Charizard EX big EX, right? These are different Pokemon with different cards and different abilities and different rules. These are not the same card at all. And one of the big things here is that there's a process called rotation. Not sure if you're familiar with rotation, but the Pokemon trading card game is one where cards that are competitive and tournament legal only last between 2 to 3 years, at which point they are no longer playable. And that process has been going since the beginning of the Pokemon TCG, and there are just only a handful of cards that are legal, so Pokemon keeps making new cards they might feature the same Pokemon, like we still see Charizard these days, but the number is not just like we're making the card look prettier. The Charizard these days is different from Gen 1 Charizard, which Gen 1 Charizard would get absolutely destroyed in the current meta. These are new cards with new attributes, new moves, and so on. And yeah, those old cards, like if you're thinking about Gen 1 Charizard, that has not been legal for a long time. And it's not even legal in expanded format, which is sort of like a longer a format that accepts older cards, but not all the way to the oldest cards. There's some major gameplay changes that happened before that don't really jive with the expanded rule set. So we're not playing those Gen 1 cards anymore, partially because, yeah, power creep is a thing, and rotation allows for power creep to happen, where you can go from the Charizard from base set that has 120 HP to Charizard EX now, which has 330 HP, and spoilers, Pokemon hasn't said anything yet, but like, we're almost certainly going to get a Mega Evolution Charizard, and it's gonna have more than 330 HP. So, yes, there's power creep, but that's all part of the evolution of the game, introducing new rules, new mechanics, and just new gameplay depth that aren't possible if we're using all of the cards that are in there throughout history. And some of those old cards, like part of the reason why there is a line between expanded and the stuff that happens before expanded is because there were trainer cards were handled differently in the old days. There was no differentiation between a supporter, a tool, an item, and they were just trainer cards, and you could play as many as you want, which really changes how the game is played. And so those sort of old trainer cards don't really work with where the game is now, and that wouldn't be possible if we had kept all of those in play. So in short, to answer the question, yes, there is power creep, but it's also part of a larger process called rotation. And those older cards and even the new cards that just have rotated out, it's all part of the ever-growing cycle of adding new cards to the game, adding new mechanics, and keeping the game fresh. Atomic Voyager asks, are there any dates or release windows for future expansions on TCG Live after Journey Together? In what months can we expect new sets? So this is actually an interesting question. It's not necessarily tied to TCG Live, because TCG Live launches the cards on the same week as they come out in physical form. So TCG Live, they'll launch the cards on like the Thursday, and then in the real world, they launch on the Friday. So it's like 24-hour difference. And Pokemon's release schedule is pretty consistent. And let's go over to a calendar so I can highlight where the launches are. I've drawn up this calendar in order to highlight the prospective release dates of every set pretty much ever. I can't speak to, there might have been weird times before when I started playing, but this is basically what the calendar looks like for Pokemon TCG releases. We get 6 sets per year, and they all kind of happen around the same time. At the beginning of the year in January, sets like a Prismatic Evolutions or a Paldean Fates, Shining Fates, those all come out in January, and these are sets that are sort of like the greatest hits of the previous year. Then we go into March, and that is when we get our first main set of the year. Then we go into May/June, somewhere in that window, where we're going to get main set 2. And then in the summertime, somewhere between July and August, we get special set 2. And that's going to be your sets like a Shrouded Fable or a Pokemon Go or Pokemon 151. Then somewhere between August and September, really depends on the launch of that September or that special set 2. If special set 2 comes out early in July, we might get it in August, but if special set 2 comes out in August, it'll happen somewhere in September instead. But that August-September window is when we get main set 3, and then last but not least is November, where we always get main set 4, which is always in November to be in time for the holiday season. This question didn't come from the thread, but it came from my Twitch chat. Shoutouts to Lil Tone, who hangs out with me like every Sunday on the stream. And they ask, what is the best way to practice sequencing? Some tips that I would suggest off the top of my head is that every time you make a turn and you look at your cards and you look at the board state, look at what are you trying to do. First, look at, and I'm not great at sequencing, and I am notorious. You can watch my gameplay videos. I'm bad at being distracted because I'm trying to entertain the chat. I am bad because I play too fast. Some things that I know I have to work on, and if I'm playing in a more serious environment, I would tone it down. But we're streaming. I'm trying to put on a good stream and answer questions. Anyway, enough making excuses for myself. But every time you make a turn, you need to figure out, like, what's your plan A? What are you trying to achieve this turn? If you can't do that, what is your plan B, your plan C? And then as you look at your cards, and then you start to play the cards that give you the best shot of achieving plan A. And then if not, maybe you have to switch to plan B, and so on. Yes, you could play just hands over and over again, but I think there's this one tip that I remember getting from Rowan Stavenow, I think is their name. I'll put a thumbnail to the video on YouTube here, which was an absolutely phenomenal video on sequencing in the Pokemon TCG and how you can sequence your cards in such a way that you are more likely to get the outcome that you are looking for. And you should go watch the video, and I'll just share one little tidbit that I learned from that has kind of changed the way that I look at playing the game and the way that I sequence my cards. And the general rule of thumb, of course, there are rules and exceptions, but the general rule of thumb is that if you have options to draw cards and options to search for specific cards, you should always play you should generally play the draw option first and then play the search option second. So for example, you have a Pheasantipity EX and you have an Ultra Ball. And what you should do in that sequence is that you should use your Pheasantipity first to draw 3 cards, because you might get the Pokemon you want to find with Ultra Ball off of the Pheasantipity. And if you find the Pokemon off of the Pheasantipity, you can then use Ultra Ball to get another thing. But if you are playing the Ultra Ball first, then you are then at the mercy of what the next 3 cards are, and you might be stuck. But you have ultimately more options if you do the draw option first and then use your targeted search later. I hope I did that little tidbit justice. Again, go watch this video. It's absolutely phenomenal for learning some sort of some advanced sequencing in the Pokemon TCG. Awesome video. Go follow their channel as well. One last question. I know my hair's a mess. It is early in the morning and I'm in a different outfit. Oh my goodness. Yeah, we're gonna put the hood on for this last one. One last question. I was in the process of editing this video and this question just came in that I really wanted to answer. So shout outs to Ms. QR for this one, who asks, will Pokemon TCG Pocket ever be in competition at the Pokemon World Championships? And actually interesting timing here, because a couple of days ago, the head of esports at Pokemon said that there were no plans to put Pocket in the World Championship circuit anytime soon. But I think there's a couple of ways of interpreting that, because anytime soon could be, anytime before the announced 2026 Worlds, right? Right now we're in the middle of the 2025 season, and the World Championships I think is in August. And once they start talking about the 2025-26 season, at that point they could introduce Pokemon TCG Pocket. So anytime soon could be like, these next few months, but maybe it's longer than that. I don't know. Do I personally think that it's going to end up on the World Championship circuit? I think so. I think the game is brilliant. It's a ton of fun to play. It's competitive. It is also a game that has a huge competitive scene. I'm not sure if you guys follow the Pokemon Pocket tournament scene, like the online tournament scene, but it absolutely obliterates the Pokemon TCG Live competitive scene in terms of like the number of entrants that Pocket tournaments get. Like Pokemon TCG Live caps out usually are like 300-ish players, oftentimes less than that, while the Pocket tournaments easily clear that, including, I think the biggest one is the Ursi Day tournaments, which have upwards of like 1,900 plus players, and they're just like massive in scale compared to the TCG Live one. So there's clearly an audience that wants to play this game competitively. I think the things potentially holding back Pocket right now is that, one, the game is relatively new. It's only been out for a couple of months. Maybe Pokemon wants to give the game some more time to figure out its balance and add some new cards into the mix. Maybe there are concerns about their standard system where they have a juniors, seniors, and masters division, at least for the card side of things. I think the other competitive Pokemon scenes also have that sort of age division as well. And maybe there's a concern about the juniors and seniors interacting with Pocket because it requires you to have a credit card, and maybe there are also like gambling gotcha elements to Pocket where like maybe you don't want to showcase the fact that there are kids who are under the age of 18 that are engaging with this this gotcha system where they're going to have to roll the dice to get these cards. And I think that could be a potential concern as well, at least from a PR standpoint. But like strictly as a game itself, I think that the game is awesome, and I think it absolutely could hold up to a competitive circuit. I would love to partake in that as well. But there's lots of logistics that need to be sorted out, and maybe it's not ready in time for Worlds this year. Maybe I think if we go into 2026 after the World Championships in 2026 and they still don't announce that Pokemon TCG Pocket is in the World Championship circuit, at that point I think it's probably not happening for whatever reason, but I think in the next year or so would be the time to put the game in the circuit. The game is wildly popular. It's been downloaded, I think, hundreds of millions of times at this point. It makes a ton of money. It is a game that people play a lot, and it's got a competitive scene to it. I think there might also be debates about how competitive the game is. I think people look at cards like a Misty or what have you, and maybe it's a little too coin flippy relative to regular Pokemon TCG. But I don't know if that's enough to disqualify it from being part of the World Championships. I do think the game is competitive enough, and there's certainly a lot of interest for this game to be elevated to a higher stage, at least from me. I would love to see it enter the World Championship circuit. And there we go. That's going to do it for all of the questions this week. Thank you to everybody that submitted questions, even if I wasn't able to read them this week. Unfortunately, weren't able to make it due to time, but hopefully I can get around to them in a future Q&A video. And if you've got any questions you'd like me to answer, leave it in the thread on the comments of this video, and I will make sure to come back and answer any that are still relevant by the time I do another one of these. Otherwise, look out for my YouTube community posts, where I'll also put up a thread there looking for questions, and that's going to be probably in a couple of weeks time. But I love answering these questions and doing these Q&As because it gives me the opportunity to talk in a way that I normally don't get to do, where we can just talk a little more freeform and have a conversation. All right, gotta get out of here. Thank you so much for watching, and we're out. Unfortunately, my buttons are not working, so I have to look like a dork and look on the side here and manually click on OBS to go by. So later. Oh, I can't do the air horn thing either. Oh, lame.